A Respectable Woman by Kate Chopin centers around Mrs. Baroda, a woman who experiences an inner conflict and emotional turmoil when her husband, Gaston, invites his friend Gouvernail to stay with them at their plantation for a week or two. Mrs. Baroda is initially displeased by the idea, as she had been anticipating a period of quiet and uninterrupted time with her husband after a busy winter of social engagements. She had heard much about Gouvernail, a journalist and former college friend of her husband, but had never met him. She forms an image of him in her mind that is unappealing, picturing him as cynical and unattractive. However, when Gouvernail arrives, Mrs. Baroda is surprised to find that he does not match her expectations. He is not the aloof and irritating figure she imagined, but rather a pleasant, unassuming man who doesn't try to impress her. Although he doesn't seek her approval, he is courteous and agreeable. His presence puzzles her, and despite herself, she begins to like him. She cannot pinpoint exactly why she feels drawn to him, as he doesn't exhibit the traits her husband had described. Gouvernail is a quiet and reserved man who enjoys simple pleasures like sitting on the portico, smoking cigars, and watching the world around him. As the days go by, Mrs. Baroda's attraction to Gouvernail grows, though she remains confused and irritated by it. She finds herself seeking his company more frequently, joining him on walks and trying to understand him better. Her feelings intensify when she finds herself in an emotionally charged situation with him one evening, sitting together in the dark beneath a live oak tree. Gouvernail speaks to her in a soft, intimate manner, sharing nostalgic thoughts about the past. Despite her desire to physically connect with him, Mrs. Baroda's sense of propriety and her identity as a respectable woman hold her back. She ultimately distances herself from him and leaves the scene. The next day, feeling conflicted and unsure, Mrs. Baroda leaves the plantation for the city, avoiding any further interaction with Gouvernail. After he leaves, Gaston expresses his surprise that his wife had such a strong aversion to his friend, and he even suggests inviting him back in the future. However, Mrs. Baroda resists the idea. In time, though, she overcomes her previous feelings and, on her own initiative, proposes that Gouvernail visit again. When she suggests this to her husband, he is delighted and assumes she has reconciled her feelings for the man. Mrs. Baroda's response, full of humour and warmth, reveals that she has come to terms with her inner conflict, though the full extent of her emotions remains ambiguous. The story highlights themes of self-restraint, inner conflict, and the complexities of desire. It delves into the tension between Mrs. Baroda's public image as a respectable woman and her private emotional experiences. Ultimately, the story examines the nuances of attraction and the ways in which societal expectations and personal identity shape one's actions.